Chris Garvey is running for Attorney General, lives by the Libertarian philosophy, and here it is. The Libertarian principle. People should be free to do what they want, except to initiate force, the threat of force, or fraud against other people or their property. Secondly, laws and regulations should be tested against the Libertarian principle. If a law has another purpose, such as banning hemp, so big oil companies needn't compete with CO2 neutral hemp diesel oil, the law should not be enforced. The Attorney General can help protect people from bad laws. Okay, Mr. New York State Attorney General Chris Garvey, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
I would love to be able to say that. Based on what the job function is for an Attorney General, can you just run through what some of those things are?
Well, it's sort of the office of political grandstanding, because you can bring suits on anything that you think is politically advantageous. That's not the way I would do things. I'd want to go after state corruption, go after government corruption, try to protect the citizens against overreach by the government, against overregulation. But of course, as the Attorney General, I'm limited. I can't do anything in a lawsuit unless the court says I win. And so a judge that doesn't agree with me could easily not take my position and lose. But it has a certain amount of persuasiveness, and it also gives me an opportunity to protect the rights of citizens. I think I can bring suit against the state of New York. And
everybody else does. You might as well.
Well, you might as well. But I'm not loyal. I'm elected by the people if I win, and therefore I'm not loyal to President Cuomo or King Cuomo.
State,
I'm not elected. I'm not loyal to the state of New York. I'm loyal to, or the governor. I'm loyal to the people of New York.
You know, it's very refreshing to hear you say that, but no one out there has the general sense that that's true, that the people are being represented.
Well, they're not.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, here in Suffolk, it's which I know a little better than some of the other places, but in Suffolk, the two-party bosses get together and they decide who's going to win the election. And they'll either put up a paper candidate or as happened when Spota was a district attorney, they only put up one candidate. They both cross-endorsed him. And then the minor parties cross-endorsed as well. And the reason I ran the first time in 2009 for district attorney is the people had no choice for the countywide offices.
Would I be wrong to say that there should never be a cross-endorsed endorsement?
You know, as a patent trademark attorney, a party name is kind of a brand name, an assurance of quality, an assurance of certain things that you can expect from the product, being the politician. So from a libertarian, you should be able to expect somebody not trying to create more laws and regulations and raise taxes, because that's what we're against.
On the other hand, as I'm thinking here, of course, because if both parties were to say this particular candidate is the best candidate, who are we to decide?
Well,
I mean,
the last guy that I ran against who was doing that was indicted for the third time I ran against him, and they did try to throw me off, but we at that point had a lot of people being very active against the establishment out here, and we got 3,000 signatures, and the Libertarian ticket stayed on the ballot. So the third time I stayed on, but yeah, it's difficult because the judges, the state court judges, were appointed by or endorsed by the same party bosses that run the Republicans and Democrats. So if they want to retire with a judicial pension, they have to, until their last term in office, they have to count on renomination by the same people who are trying to throw us off the ballot. So it
can be confusing for people out there to try to understand this. I mean, the general public, I mean, I know a little bit, and I still get confused by that.
Yeah, and when you see them cross-endorsing, and last time around, last year, they didn't cross-endorse everybody. In fact, I think the Republican rank and file rebelled and said, stop cross-endorsing the Democrats. We want our own candidates, and we want to give people a choice. And that's why I ran in the first place, because there was no choice. And I figured, I don't care how good this guy is, and yes, he might be better than Catterson, his predecessor, but...
It doesn't do good to go to the other side of monopoly, or
right, yeah. Somebody's got to give the voters a choice. So that's why we we did put ourselves on the ballot, but we got objected off. We had about 300 signatures to spare out of the 1,500 we needed, and they objected, and in both cases the judges threw us out on technicalities before we ever got to the merits of the signatures. Now you can see why he would do that. It's going through 1,700 signatures, signature by signature, to see which one has the same handwriting, and
what a nightmare.
Yeah, it's kind of a nightmare. They don't have this in Jersey, and Jersey's no paragon of virtue, but in Jersey you pay a small fee and you're on the ballot, and they don't have a crowded ballot. But the justification for this complicated process is to avoid a crowded ballot that would be excessively confusing to people. That's their justification.
What if they tried it for two election cycles, to see how that would work?
Well,
they've
tried it for one, and they got Democratic winners in both races. But I think that's because of the changing nature of the electorate in Suffolk County. It
may not be relative to the process, it just may be.
Yeah, it's just we're getting to have more Democrats here, and part of that is that people who have earned their money and want to keep some of it, people who've retired and therefore might have enough time and energy to engage in the political process, they say, why do I need to pay taxes to New York State? And they go off to Carolina or Florida, and they stop paying income taxes, and they, people tell me the real estate taxes in other states for a house where you would be paying $10,000 a year, $1,000, $2,000. It's a much different. In fact, most of the people who are working for the county government and the state government, when they retire, they don't stay in New York. And if you do keep a house in New York and you're fairly well-to-do and you're making any money still, they will conduct an audit to make sure you did not stay in New York for more than half the year. If you're one day off over half a year, they'll hit you with the New York State income tax. So people sell their houses.
They have too much to lose. Imagine that they can afford to pay auditors to do this work.
And the auditor tells people. People's own accountants tell people that you can't afford. If they're rich, they tell them you can't afford to die in New York because it'll cost you 10% of your estate. And so people just say, that's the end of New York. I'm gone. People who are engaged in the financial business, they don't have to be in.
Are they going to start dragging bodies across state lines, to make that work? Or?
Yeah, there've been some phrases about that. If you can't find enough Democrat voters, just create them out of thin air or import them from somewhere else.
Give me some heads up on what happened with Schneiderman and now that Barbara Underwood is.
Well, Schneiderman was accused by some ex-girlfriends of being violent with them when he was drunk. And since the Democrat Party is usually trying to portray itself as pro-women's rights, this would have been embarrassing to them. So Schneiderman, I guess, was encouraged. This is all speculation. I wasn't there at the meeting, but I imagine he was encouraged to step down. And looking at that $6.5 million campaign fund, which he gets to keep in New York State, he probably thought, retirement's not so bad.
Why do I have to keep doing this? When I can just take the money and run.
If I stay here, they're likely to try to encourage me to leave by prosecuting me. So
why can't the people who donated, who have a record of what they donated,
ask for it back?
Yeah,
I guess they could ask. I don't know if they'll give it to them.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But I mean, that's a good idea, don't you think?
Sure, it would be. Yeah,
especially if you didn't perform in an honest way.
But New York State is by the politicians and for the politicians. So government by the politicians for the politicians.
So what will Chris Garvey do if he's elected?
Well, I'll buy a bulletproof vest And but other than that, I'll try to look for, real problems that are problems of corruption in New York State, and concentrate my efforts at going after that, and also look at the ways that New York State is abusing people, and try to stop them from that. Cuomo is talking about licensing people who mow your lawn. Why do we need a license for people who mow your lawn? I mean,
they want money to the coffers of government. That's
well,
about
maybe,
it.
yeah, because there are people who mow lawns without actually filing income tax returns. So if he requires a license, then I don't know if he's going to have lawn care police out there making sure that everybody with a trailer.
How come the enforcement aspect doesn't come into this picture when somebody suggests wacky things like that?
Whenever you, I forget how my limit. You may think that your law is benign, that I'm forgetting the rhyme, but it's basically there is no benign.
The money is not yours but mine.
Right. There is no benign law, because no matter what you make into a law, in order to enforce it, you've got to threaten to use force. And if people resist you, it's going to cost them time and money to resist your law. And yeah, there's no benign law. It's gonna cost money to enforce it, and yeah, laws against murder, laws against robbery. But who does more robbery than the state of New York? They do so much robbery that people are fleeing the state.
That,
yeah.
Check this quote out. It has been said that a government that is big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take away everything you have.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Who said that?
I don't have a name after it.
Okay.
I don't know where I got it from. I forgot.
I've heard it before. Let me see. No, I can't think of who said it. But yeah, it sounds like a libertarian.
Yeah. Well, see, the libertarians in general, the way I looked at how I would compare all of the political parties, I always looked at libertarians as having, as your simple principle says, just if you're not doing anything wrong, what do we need management for?
Right. Yeah. People. Yeah, maybe the governor in New York is smarter than a lot of people, and if he had the interest and the energy and the time, he could make a better decision than some of those people. But for the most part, people know what's best for them, and they know what's best for them a whole lot more.
They know that killing is bad. Live by the golden rule.
Yeah,
They know
well,
stuff
that's right.
like that,
That's
right.
And in terms of their own behavior, they pretty much have a good idea of what's going to bring them the greatest happiness and the greatest well-being and the least conflict with their neighbors, and that's what they do. And for a governor or whatever busybody bureaucrat is telling you how to live your life, he doesn't care about you as much as you do. And so for them to be making your decisions for you is just is bad.
How does what you're saying about being a libertarian enjoying the Second Amendment?
Not enjoying it, actually being we're very much in support of the Second Amendment.
It's the wrong word to enjoy. I just couldn't think of the right one, but you know what I mean.
How does it interact with the Second Amendment? Well, it's a very important right, because once you take away people's right to defend themselves and their ability to defend themselves.
Constitutionalist.
Yes, well, yes, and the reason we have that amendment in the Constitution is because we had the experience in the Revolutionary War. We didn't go to war because of taxation without representation. We didn't start shooting at that point. We started shooting when the British sent their troops to go and take the guns, because they knew that they knew from the experience in Europe, in England, whenever you had a good monarch, he tended to try to arm the people as a bulwark against corrupt nobles who might try to overthrow him. But when you had a tyrant king, he would try to disarm the people. And it's always been that way.
Somebody once told me that the gun manufacturers in the early days before that happened were the reason why we won, or one of the most significant reasons why we won, because we were able to produce and manufacture weapons without the government of England having anything to say about it.
Now, most people already had guns, and there were militias all over the colonies that were armed and had gunpowder and had ball and were able to bring to bear. These militias were put there to fight off the Dutch and then the Indians and then and then the French, and eventually, when the British started to become abusive and engage in mercantilism, another name for that is fascism, and another name is crony capitalism, where the government controls the markets. There's a weaver's cottage in Huntington, where the Huntington Militia, which I'm a member, founded in 1653.
Is that on Park Avenue? Yeah?
Yes, on Park Avenue, yeah. The Cinema Arts Center, in the driveway of the Cinema Arts Center. It was a little red building.
Yeah.
And he was a weaver. He was not allowed to weave cloth wider than 36 inches, because that was for the British weavers to have a monopoly on. So that's the kind of, regulation. And it's taken, in those days it was called mercantilism, because your merchants controlled the parliament.
I remember the frame, I just didn't.
Yeah. And then later it became known as fascism, because under fascism the government regulated everything, and they tended to favor their friends who were making things that
manufacturers.
And getting subsidies from the government. And today we don't call it fascism, we call it crony capitalism, because the privileged capitalists manipulate the market so that they have an advantage in business over small guys who can't afford the lawyers to deal with all the regulations.
I guess there's always some of that.
Yeah, your real estate business is an example of that.
Yeah, the overregulation, the unnecessary regulation, the declaration of agencies that before did not have a great application to have to separate. And by the way, most of that was instigated by lawyers who were jealous, we found, of the real estate people getting a larger check than they would get for the closing. I'm making
that makes some sense, because I know somebody who was in he was a house inspector for the buyer, and there was no need for regulation there, because if you didn't catch every defect in the house and tell the buyer about it, the buyer could sue you. And the person I know went for many, many years without ever being sued. He was called by lawyers every now and then. He'd say, "Well, yeah, you say I didn't tell the client about that defect in that wall. Well, let's take a look at page 12 of the report. Oh, look, there it is. There's a defect in that wall, and you're going to have to spend $10,000 to fix that.
Reconstruct it.
Yeah." And so, but it's in there, it's in the report, and you should have taken that into account when you set the price. That's why I put it in there, so you'd know that, you could negotiate about that. So there was no problem, because somebody who missed things would go out of business very quickly or wouldn't get an insurance policy. There was no need to regulate it, and somehow the state of New York a few years ago decided they were going to regulate it. The education department that does the licensing, they didn't even know what to ask on the test. They had to ask the existing guys what's this business all about.
In a small way, that's what's happening now when it comes to all these politically correct, like the straw and things like. Listen, I'm all for fish living as long as they can possibly live, and I just didn't like the idea that we've got so many problems with people crossing the border, and they want to worry about the straw population. Certain politically correct people are out of what are they? Not destroying, but they're making a law that eliminates straws, plastic straws.
Oh, the plastic straw thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
over and above the fact that people are crossing the border, and some of them are terrorists, that doesn't seem to bother anybody.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things like the plastic bags out here in Suffolk.
Right.
Well,
and that was a serious issue.
When you buy the heavy-duty bag that will last you for a few trips, it's supposedly 1,000 times more plastic and resources than those very thin bags that the supermarkets gave you for free, and it increases the rate of infection because you're putting the food in an old contaminated bag. So
never would have thought of that. Okay,
yeah,
good one.
Well, maybe it's a form of genocide.
Let's go to a little bit back towards the Second Amendment, or at least what is the Sullivan Law?
The Sullivan Law.
Yeah.
Big Tim Sullivan, shall I sing the song? Big Tim Sullivan won nominations. His thugs removed opponents by defenestration. His thugs didn't bother with an honest job. Instead, they had chosen to steal and to rob. But armed New Yorkers Armed New Yorkers were a bitter pill. Sullivan's muggers getting shot and killed. To keep his robbers from being harmed, he passed a law to get his victims disarmed. So now you need a permit to carry a gun, and in most places they won't give you one. A shameful legacy of bad old Big Tim protecting muggers from New York's victims. And that's what it was. He would go into he had a bunch of thugs who were his supporters back in the early 20th century, and he would go in there with his thugs, and they'd beat up all their opponents and throw them out the windows of the Democrat Club. Then they'd hold a nomination, and there was no opposition, so he was unanimously nominated.
Is that like the Gangs of New York, that movie, The Gangs of New York?
That was earlier. That was, I think, that was just before the Civil War, I think.
I seem to remember that.
Yeah, but it's the same tradition of New York corruption. And so in 1911, in order to protect his muggers, I think he said, it's getting so you can't shake down a Dago shopkeeper fresh off the boat without getting shot. And he thought being able to shake people down was a good thing, extortion. So he wanted to disarm. He was an Irish Protestant, so he wanted to disarm the Irish Catholics, the Italians, and the blacks.
They were fighting way back then.
Right, so it was the purpose was the same racist purposes that these laws had disarming blacks in the Reconstruction period or during the slavery era, because you didn't want your slaves being armed. They might shoot you.
Sure.
So if you want to keep slaves, you can't have them armed. And if you want to if you're taking away the guns from people, you may be doing it because you're planning to enslave them or kill them.
Let's get a little bit towards the legalizing drugs issue we haven't really hit upon yet.
Okay. Yeah. We're all opiate makers. You make opiates in your body every day. And so when you smash your thumb with a hammer, you'll notice a warm feeling going up your arm. Those are the endorphins that your body is producing in order to kill the pain, because you really don't want to hit your thumb with that hammer again. So you want some warning that you've just hurt yourself, but you don't want to think about it all day. So the endorphins kill the pain. When you drink alcohol, you irritate your nervous system, and the endorphins come on, and they counter the irritation of your nerves and your brain cells and everything, and those endorphins get you high. And that's how the alcohol high works. Well, the alcohol high doesn't have the same sort of withdrawal that opiates do, because alcohol, your body is creating the opiates.
It's a filtration system, a natural filtration system.
Yeah, you're removing the alcohol,
right.
unless it's wood alcohol, then you better take it with ethyl alcohol, otherwise it'll the wood alcohol is a nerve poison. Yeah. Which was one of the problems with Prohibition, because people were selling wood alcohol. You know, you have criminals supplying your drugs, you're going to have an unreliable source. So the opiates should be supplied by the drugstores, and they should say what the dosage is, and then you wouldn't have people dying of fentanyl from.
That was the only thing. Yeah, the fentanyl thing is a recent phenomenon, because I haven't even heard of it.
Well, who would choose to have? Well, actually, fentanyl's wouldn't be so bad if you knew it was that dosage of fentanyl, because it's just another opiate. But they tend to put too much in, and people die from it. So, what happens then? Now
your position of legalizing or keeping
sell it in
legal.
drugstores. Sell it in drugstores. Make it legal. It was legal up to 1911, and ladies drank a teaspoon of laudanum during that monthly time when they had discomfort, and most of them didn't become addicted. Those that were didn't have to knock over liquor stores to get their fix. They just went to the drugstore and paid a small price for the laudanum, and then they could get what they needed.
What would it do?
It was an opiate.
No, I mean, what would it do if you were successful here to get?
Well, first of all, you wouldn't have criminal supply, so you wouldn't have the overdosing. Unless you favor genocide against the people who feel uncomfortable and feel the need for opiates, it's a very bad thing to have it illegal. So what would happen if you take enough opiates? If you take any opiates, your body is going to reduce the production of your opiates, and so you're not going to be making as much of them. And so if you want to get high, you're going to have to take a little more next time. And eventually, if you keep taking more and more opiates from the outside, your body says, well, I don't need to make any of this stuff. So now all the opiates are coming from the outside. If you're counting on criminals and a lot of money to supply you with the opiates, you may run out of, you may not be able to get resupplied. And so now it's going to take your body 24 hours to ramp up production on those opiates. And that's what cold turkey is about. And that's where the physical dependence comes from. So in theory, after a couple of days of being cold turkey, your body's back up to speed making its own opiates.
Chris, we ran the gamut on issues. We have about 30 seconds left. I'd like you to tell the audience how to reach you and help you get
okay. VoteGarvey.org. VoteGarvey.org is my website, and the issues that we were talking about today, some of them, there's some more. Like I would prosecute any water company. Well, first I'd warn them, but I'd prosecute any water company that puts fluoride in your water, because that's a toxin. And it messes up your brain cells. It causes your brain to absorb aluminum, which is bad for the brain, and also and also causes tumors.
What else? Anything quick?
Let's see. I've got a list here. I've got a little list. Let's see what else I was talking about. Why do you have a need of gun? Because tyrants have killed. Compare the 18 million private murders in the 20th century, where individuals killed other individuals, to the 180 million people that were killed by their own governments. And ask yourself which you should trust more to have a gun. The individuals that Stalin and Hitler disarmed, that Pol Pot and Mao Tse-tung disarmed before they killed millions and hundreds of millions of them. About 100, I think. Depending on...
It's amazing what they can do when they take your guns, isn't it? Chris?
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for your time here, Chris Garvey, for New York State Attorney General. I'm sorry we ran out of time.
Well,
you've been watching Gray Matters, the program that shines light on the events of the society we live in and the need for education and reform. We keep you up to speed in the world of politics, exciting trends, and hot-button issues of the day. Remember, you can't get this information just anywhere. See you on your TV next week. Thank you for watching.